Good evening, and I'd like to welcome everyone to this regularly scheduled meeting of the Planning Commission for Tuesday, February 22nd, 2022. I'm going to open the meeting at 7:30 p.m. And can we please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. May I have roll call, please?
Mr. Fitzer? Here. Mr. Kucera?
Here.
Mr. Hara?
Here.
Mr. Nushai?
Here.
Ms. Redmond?
Here.
Mr. Sinaki? Mr. Tinlin? Here. Mr. Watson? Mr. Yell? There's quorum.
Thank you. Agenda item number 4 is approval of the agenda. I have no problems with the agenda as listed. Does anyone see any changes they'd like to make?
No.
I don't think we have to roll call that, do we? We just,
I'll make a motion to approve agendas presented.
I believe last time, if no comments were made, we could just move on.
Okay.
okay.
That's
yeah.
what the past practice was.
Yeah.
So, and I think if there's comments going forward, I think then a motion will be necessary.
Okay, so we all just verbally approved it.
Yep.
Okay. Agenda item number 5 is the approval of the regular meeting minutes from January 25th, 2022. I'll entertain a motion to approve that.
That's what I just did. I did it early. Okay. I'll make a motion to approve the meeting minutes as presented, January 25th, 2022.
Do I have support?
Yes.
Support. Any comments? Anybody want to make any changes? Everybody's happy with it? Roll call, please.
Mr. Kucera?
Yes.
Mr. Hara?
Yes.
Nushai?
Yes.
Ms. Redmond?
Yes.
Mr. Tinlin?
Yes.
Mr. Fitzer?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Agenda item number 6 is public discussion, items not on the agenda. Is there anyone from the public wishing to speak? Seeing none here, is there anybody online maybe? Do we know? No. Nope. Okay, going once, twice. I will then close public discussion. And we'll go into item number 7, introduction of the working draft capital improvement plan. I think someone from Giffords will walk us through this.
Good evening, everyone.
Evening.
I was going to say Happy New Year because it's been a while since I've seen you all. So I'm going to say it anyway, even though it's February, towards the end of February. For those of you who I haven't met yet, I'm Jill Boehm. I work with Joe at Giffords Webster, partner there. And so it's nice to have you. Welcome to the Planning Commission, even though you've all been here for a little bit. But it's my first time seeing you in a while. So we wanted to present to you tonight the working draft of the capital improvement plan. This is a new process that the city is going through this year. It's something that we've talked about for several years. And it's something that's included in the Michigan Planning Enabling Act, a task of the Planning Commission. We've gone through some trainings. We had a training session, a joint meeting of the Planning Commission and City Council, and I think the DDA was included too, back in, I believe it was September. So the existing members of the Planning Commission at that time have had the chance to go through that, but for the benefit of our new members and the public, just to kind of catch you up to speed on where we're at. So you've got this working draft document. This is not a document that's by any means ready to go. But we wanted to present it to you to sort of lay the foundation so that you could understand where we're coming from, so that when you do see it for the public hearing, that you'll have some understanding about where it came from and what it is. So generally, it is the city's expectation for capital expenditures, so those are things over $5,000, that are anticipated over the next 6-year planning horizon. Why do we do that? Well, city's got a lot of needs. There's a lot of infrastructure needs, there's a lot of capital equipment needs, there are building needs, and things that we need to be planning for as we look into the future. Doing it this way, we say, okay, well, in year 5, we're going to have this expense that we anticipate, helps us plan for that. With a 6-year capital improvement plan, the city council is able to budget funds for that, so that in effect, the first year of the CIP becomes part of the city's operating budget. That doesn't mean that things can't change, and it doesn't mean that just because something shows up on year 2, 3, 4 of the capital improvement plan this year, that maybe next year something else might come up that we didn't anticipate, and things get rearranged. So it's a 6-year plan, but it gets updated every year. So I think that's helpful to know as you consider the items that are in here. We have had a working group comprised of department heads, which is really ideal because all of the department heads in the city have an intimate understanding of the needs that they may anticipate over the next several years. So we would include the police department, the DPW, the DDA, planning, finance, all of this, the important activities and departments that are in the city, and having them think through those things that are needed. And so you'll see those listed on the pages of the working draft. Oh, good.
Just knows
I
it.
forgot who you were there for a minute. So you'll see we've got a little bit of an explanation. If you had a chance to look through the working draft, some examples of what capital improvements or capital expenditures might be, what the policy is, and then the role of the Planning Commission. So the Michigan Planning Enabling Act has, as I said, indicated or provides that the Planning Commission is the body to prepare the capital improvement plan. It's very common to hear from planning commissioners, especially as you are doing this for the first couple of years, the first time, to say, well, what do we know about DPW's needs? What do we know about the police chief and their needs for new cars and things like that? This is, I think, a great platform for the community to understand how local government works, how our streets get funded, how our buildings stay in good repair, how our leaves get picked up, and how do we plan for that as we go forward. So I think it's a great opportunity to have this discussion at the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission is used to holding public hearings and thinking about things from a long-range perspective. The Planning Commission is not expected to be experts on all the details of how much things cost, but generally looking at things from more of a balanced perspective, like how are we coming up with these items for the first year? How do we know that the police cars are needed or whatever it may be? And that's why we've got some information that's included in that. We'll have more information fleshed out when you see this next time. In addition, our team of the department heads and Commissioner Fitzer is on that committee with us, going to be looking through and considering some of the values, the ranking of each of these projects to make sure that things that are of utmost importance, so for example, things that are required by federal law or state law, those are going to be things that we really need to take care of, make sure we prioritize those. Things that improve service to the city, to the residents is another high priority, and you can see those things. I think those are illustrated in here. And then we have this process here. So we started out by taking a look at some of these policy documents. So that would be things like the city's master plan, the downtown plan, Parks and Recreation plan, getting an understanding of all of our long-range activities and things that we need from an implementation standpoint, and then from there looking at what are the capital expenditures associated with implementing these long-range plans. Looking at that and then having each of the department heads go back and determining what those needs are, and then drafting the process. Following that will be the Planning Commission's public hearing, and then a recommendation to City Council. And then, as I said, City Council will adopt that as well and include the first year as their operating budget. So that's the general overview. I'm happy to answer any questions, probably not too specific with each of the items and their associated costs. But if there are questions that you would like answered that we can do in between now and the time we have the public hearing, information that you think would be helpful, we'd be glad to put that together. We want this to be a very easy-to-read document and accessible for the general public so that they have a good understanding of what's going on and what needs are. So,
This is something that the Planning Commission was supposed to have been doing for the past several years, right?
It has been part of the Michigan Planning Enabling Act for a number of years. It's not uncommon that communities haven't necessarily jumped on board with that.
Clausen hasn't done it
Clausen
until
hasn't
just
done it
now.
up until this point, no.
Right.
They've been done, I think, more at the administrative level, but in previous years and not since we've been working.
Yeah, most of the-
And really mostly with respect to roads and sewer and water expenditures, but not the comprehensive look that we were recommending and that we're embarking
Yeah,
on now.
most of the budget numbers, when I was on council years ago, each department would come in and show us their budget, and we'd move numbers back and forth and everything else. This, to me, is like you're having another group of people here looking at it, and what the planning commission comes up with is strictly suggestions, right, to them, just a little
Right.
guidance to help them out as to where the money's going to be spent on things.
Right. You may see something where you say, well, gosh, this department is working in this part of the city, and we see some other improvements. Maybe there's road improvements here too. Is there a way that we can do those in the same year so that we try to be more efficient with the way we're spending money? So those are the kinds of things, we've been talking about that as a team, but that would be something else that the Planning Commission might want to take an eye to.
So a couple questions I had in regards to it, more based on like a procedure of public. The public hearing and I watched a couple of videos on like other cities and their implementation of it. Some of them had like boards where citizens would literally take a sticker and go vote on certain, certain improvement plans. Do we know what the public hearing, is it going to be like a typical public hearing where we just open up for comment, or is it going to be some type of presentation? I know you're going to reform things, but do we have a process for that?
The public hearing will be, I think, in the standard public hearing format, where we'll have the information available online before the meeting, and then we'll explain it as we go through the process. It's our intent that as many of the department heads who can be here for that public hearing will be, so that they can answer some of those more specific questions that we may not be able to answer.
Okay, so I don't want to go like too far into details with like the questions. I have specifics on, just whether or not maybe I noticed a couple times in DPW that they were they said that they would expand DPW and I don't remember what regard it was, certain maintenance type things of vehicles. Like just the process of, and I know we talked a little bit about it at that, the meeting we had where we kind of role played this.
Yeah.
But the process they have to weigh, let's say leasing a vehicle versus purchasing a vehicle, or in-house maintenance versus out-house maintenance, the cost benefit kind of thing.
Right.
Those are things that stood out to me specifically. I don't, like I said, expect an answer, but I would anticipate that might be something that comes up.
I think that's a reasonable question to ask, and knowing that you have that question, then we can relay that back to the team so that they have they're able to prepare a response to that, because they likely have already considered those things, and it's really part of their role in the jobs that they have, is to think about what's the best way that we can serve the city while within the resources that we have. And so a lot of times we're seeing that, those different things being weighed, and they can answer those questions for you. But that's a good one to take back to the team so that they're prepared.
Okay, and like in terms of, again, like we're not city council, so we're not here to like
Right.
scrutinize the budget, right? But there were items that I saw that might be forthcoming with grants and certain, like the electric vehicle charging stations. I've heard things that were coming from the pipeline. Like, I'm sure that the city is,
Yeah.
advocating
Absolutely.
for grants in
Yes.
any way they can.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And you'll see that that's an item on there. So when we get to that was something else that I should have mentioned at the beginning too for the newer members, is that part of considering our capital expenditures over the next 5 to 6 years is identifying the funding source. And where we can include grants, we like to do that. So for example, if there was, I'll use recreation, and this is part of what the Planning Commission's role is too. So you're looking at the master plan, you're looking at the recreation plan and saying, oh, I see that we have a park improvement here. Can we get a grant for that? Sure. We estimate that the park improvement would be $50,000. We would not put $50,000 as grant funding. We would put in $25,000 as grant funding and $25,000 as the match. And the match is important because as we're thinking about the future, we know that we have to plan for that too. Like, sure, we're going to try and get a grant, but we also need to make sure we're budgeting for those associated matching funds that we may or may not be required to do. And for anything that's not next year, we have the opportunity to revise that so that when we do this process next year, now, this year we've kind of looked at these electric vehicle charging stations and no, we can't get grants now, so it's not in there. We could put it in the text that we might look for it, and that might be something that's worth adding. So that next year when we do this again, now maybe there are grants available, and now we can update the plan to reflect that.
Okay, in terms of some of the vehicles or things that, like big items, the process of, getting new ones, you have old ones to potentially sell. I don't know what the worth might be of those.
And they can all answer those, because we've
Yeah.
had those conversations, definitely.
Oh, okay,
Yep.
cool. So they'll be prepared to
Oh, yeah.
say how that's, and they'll calculate it into, okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right.
When you mention matching funds grants, if we have money set aside, say we got 25,000 sitting there, hoping to get another 25, if we don't have the money sitting there, can we get the grant, or does that money have to be there in order to?
Well, it depends on the grant. I'm most familiar with the DNR grants, and those are matching grants, and the higher a match you put forward, the more points you get towards receiving the grant.
But do you have to have the money up front, or would you lose the grant if you
No,
couldn't
you do,
match?
when you apply for the grant, you do have to submit a resolution committing to
That
the
you will
match.
match.
Yeah, so it's
Okay.
good to have it budgeted, and that way you're prepared.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I didn't notice, like, the library. Is that scooped, is that like a subcategory of one of these kind of?
The library just didn't have any capital expenses.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
They do have some things that they wanted to add, but none of them were at the $5,000 threshold. Most of them were below that, so.
Okay,
So for this round of capital improvement planning, there were a few things that I think they were considering for the future, but nothing this year.
okay. In terms of, I'm sure, well, if we do have public comment, like maybe Facebook shows, there might be a lot of people asking about, sewers and streets and things like that. How often, and I don't know how it works with, we're not on the Oakland County Commission's sewer discharge, right? That's not part of,
That I can't
we're
answer.
SACRA, okay.
Yeah, you're
We're-
SACRA.
Right, so, is there a way to get someone from there specifically?
We can invite them,
Okay,
sure.
okay.
Do you see these meetings scheduled as part of this regular planning commission meeting, or are these outside meetings, additional meetings,
These have been additional meetings. that we've been
specifically
in.
for CIP?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think in addition to, some of the opportunities to have the department heads kind of speak on behalf of their requests and their items in the CIP, I think would also be beneficial if we had a meeting or a topic on the agenda to kind of do a 101 on funding and funding sources, like different grants, what all of that means, whether any other funding sources that the city gets, Act 51 or
That's a good idea.
federal aid or.
Yeah, and we can include some of that information in the CIP too. I think that's helpful.
Right.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, and I think with the number of projects that we list in the CIP, it should also list that, where the funding source, I know you have a column with the TBD for the funding source, but I think we should have a
Most of them
clear
are going to
direction.
probably be general fund, so, except for the DDA, because it has a separate funding source, but.
All right. And then I was thinking, kind of piggyback on Commissioner Redmond's comment about the public hearing. And I don't know what criteria we have to prioritize these projects, but I'm curious if we've thought about like even an open house with the series of projects that we do have, also inclusive of infrastructure projects. If what's important, how do we know what's important to the city, to the
Yeah.
public?
I think our idea this year was to get one under our belt so that we all knew how the process worked and get everybody on board with this new process. And then we can start doing greater public input opportunities maybe next year. So that was sort of the thinking behind, the traditional just public hearing. This will have an interactive component, though. So there will be an online component where people can click on the different projects and understand where they are and what the funding source is and how much and what year it's planned for. So there'll be opportunities for people to get an idea of what these are, and then going forward from there.
But would there be a way to kind of piggyback that and have even a survey, just to gauge maybe people who can't be here, or even a interactive response of questions? I mean, I know that I've heard before that some people have a hard time getting here
Sure.
to share public comment. So the better we are to kind of, get that information out there and get responses. Is there a way that we can do that?
I think we could do that in a more open way, and maybe we'll work with Nick to make sure that when the draft is ready, that it goes up online right away, and then we'll set up a way for people to make comments on it so that they can do it that way. I think, a survey or other things like that really takes us kind of out of the scope of this project, but certainly would be something that we would love to do maybe next year.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a question. When is this document going to be finalized? What's the date?
It should be finalized within the next month.
Okay. 'Cause I just noticed on the section with the roads, there's nothing there yet.
Yeah, we
so-
just got that
Okay,
information.
all right, so,
Yeah.
thank you.
Well, yeah, I was going to bring up the road thing because.
You want to pack this room?
We've just been, I know.
Well,
Yeah, leave
because
that
I
blank,
thought we
right?
did have some type of layout, or no,
Yeah.
was that just sidewalks?
So we've had road information that was, again, sort of created in its own document, and we want to fold that into this one so that everything's in one place. So we haven't even really had a chance to look at all of it yet.
So was there a company that did a survey of like higher priority so people can?
Yes,
Is
the
that
city's
some-
engineer, AEW, they did a survey, a PACER study, and I believe that's included. Did you look at the stuff that we got from Trevor today? We haven't had a chance. It
That's
really
probably
just came
4 or
in
5
today.
years old, isn't it?
I think the PACER information was more recent than that, but
I
we'll.
think the last one I saw was probably about 5 years old, I
Okay.
think, where they did the entire city. And
Yeah.
Well, I hate to keep picking on like DPW because they're great, but like I'm not trying to pick on them is what I'm trying to say. But like some of their new equipment type things, maybe an explanation of just justifying the cost of like, does that mean it's less man hours or like
Right. That's a good
when they say
question.
they've never had a bucket. What is it, a bucket for a loader? It helps to expand their services. Well,
Right.
I didn't really know what that meant. Is that, I don't know. Who knows? Trees? I don't know. So just having an explanation in showing like an overall, benefit versus cost
Yes.
to a community is, I think,
Yeah.
important.
Yeah, I
Yeah, we'll
know
work with-
during the meeting I was invited to, a couple of department heads identified, some of these needs were to replace, aging equipment. So I think that they'll be able to speak to that pretty.
Right. There was equipment that
openly.
was even up to almost 20 years old, I think, in some cases,
Right.
so. But that's good to have that information included too, so that people can understand that.
So, if I may, Mr. Chair, so this document that was included in the packet that is described as the project inventory, is this how old is this revision? There's nothing in here about roads, but you say there's going to be
There
something
will
in
be,
here.
yeah, we've been piecing together the data as we've had it. The project inventory is current through now.
Okay.
With the addition of roads that you'll see next time.
So, and this is a more macro
Mm-hmm.
question, just because I'm new to the commission, but you have a lot of experience working with other
Mm-hmm.
cities, so, I'm motivated, I think, as the rest of the commissioners, to get this right. This is a new day, and we have the opportunity to provide some input and try to maximize what little resources we have for the best that we can do. Is there a city that you work with that you would say is like a benchmark? Like, boy, if you guys were like this city, they're doing a really good job that we could like maybe study in our free time.
I'll just think about that. And I guess really, I'll ask you the question too. Like when you say really excelling at
Great.
what?
Yeah, so.
At developing a nice plan, sure.
Yeah,
Or
well,
if it's
I would do it in, I would say two metrics come to my mind.
Okay.
So one, are we maximizing federal funding and state
Right,
funding?
okay.
Like, are we leaving anything on the table, put
Right.
very generically? And then secondly, is our plan really integrated well? In other
Mm-hmm.
words, does DPW say the same thing that council says, that planning says, that 7 out of 10 neighbors we live next to say? Like, are we all
Right.
on the same page? Or do you hear things like saying, we have no plan for roads, or our roads are perfect, and DPW says something completely different, and then we look at our master plan, there's nothing in it about roads, and then there's, in the CIP plan, a great deal about what needs to be spent to do it, but it's not in our actual CIP program, right? So those
Yeah.
are total disconnects,
Right.
sort of
I
happening.
think that you would find, and you will hear from the department heads, those folks are really connected. They know, because they get the calls, right? DPW is going to get the calls when leaves aren't picked up or snow's not plowed. So they know what's needed, and they know what they have to work with and what they need to cover. And they're getting direction from council, who's also hearing from the community about what the needs are. And so I think that the document will reflect that. I think that it may be too soon to tell how well it's integrated, because it'll be our first year doing it. I think it's something, though, that with an eye to that, and building it each year after year, it'll get easier because you'll have a better understanding each time you do it. And there will be those things, too, like 5 years from now, you're going to say, you know what, you've had this thing on this list for the last 5 years. Are you going to do it or not? And to say, really, well, we can't find the money to do it, so we have to just keep pushing it off. Or, we try to figure out a way to fund it. So there are going to be those things. So I think the first year is trying to establish the process and make sure we set some of the best practices in place, to your point, so that next year it's more clear, and then the community can have even a better involvement and understanding of how it all works. I think this process is really good, though, and I saw it probably 10 years ago in another community, and there were just a couple people at the public hearing. Nobody really came, but I was fascinated by it, because for me, and 10 years ago, like hearing what the DPW director needed in terms of trucks, or what the police chief needed, it's hearing about how all the needs can be balanced in the city, and what it really takes to run a city, and the resources that are available, and really like the importance of trying to identify sources for the funding. So I think it's a really good thing, and the more people that are involved in it, like the Planning Commission, I think the better off you'll be in the long run. So I think this is a good start towards that.
Sure. What is the deadline to provide, I guess, our stamp of approval?
When the city council starts budgeting for next year,
So that's
which is
like-
generally the end of March, April.
Okay, so we don't have much time to provide whatever impact we do. But is it
Yeah.
a fair statement to say that if we do go through the step to review it as a commission and to make recommendations, or to give, I'll just generically say, our blessing, right? What does that mean? Or I guess what would be a good blessing and what would be a crappy blessing? What comes to my mind is a crappy blessing would be like, do whatever you want, we don't care, we haven't really thought about it, there's nothing strategic about it one way or the other for us. Or this is completely lockstep with our master plan. We have a detailed master plan, and these inventories accommodate 90% of what's in our master plan. Like, we need these things, we've looked through it thoroughly, 90% of the dollars that are in this plan are congruent with what we think we need as a planning committee. We can't approve it, we can't make money, we can't borrow money, it's not in our purview, but it's within the scope of the plan. Is that appropriately understood, or?
Yes, I think so. Yeah, I think that it's somewhere in between there is probably where you'll end up.
Yeah.
You're going to look at this and say, well, it seems like it's pretty good. It seems like it's well thought through. It seems like it's in alignment with what the community expects of us. And it is in keeping with the long-range planning documents that we have at our disposal. You're not going to find, we need more leaf sweeper uppers in the master plan, most likely. But you do know that the city expects, residents and business owners expect a certain level of service in terms of yard maintenance and street maintenance and things of that nature.
Right.
With that said, if you don't mind, the municipal parking lot, is that Is that something that we're seeing we're gonna, in the future have a need for? Or like, is there some type of study that was brought to DDA to say, like, look, you guys are running out of parking spots, in what type of structure might that be? Are we looking, I'm sure we're not going to be, Ferndale 5 stories high parking structure, but, that was something that's definitely stood out to me in terms of, well, that would seem to, we can put it back to back with our master plan. That's an easy one, right?
Right.
Versus the other ones that are just pertinent.
Right, exactly.
So
And that is something that we, even in the 2015 downtown master plan that we helped the city with, identified a need for updating the parking in the municipal lots. So whether it's reorganizing, restriping, cleaning them up, finding more parking spaces, that's something that we've documented for 6 or 7 years now.
Okay, so it's not a new parking
No,
structure. It's
no.
just an update to the existing?
Right, and any other, I don't know if Joan, if you want to speak to that at all, or if you want to wait until next time, but you want to talk about parking?
There is a current parking study that's in a draft form.
Yeah. That's good. So it's an ongoing process.
Okay, thanks.
I think in the spirit of alignment and integration with, all of our other policy documents, master plan is a good example. I think if, with the list of with this project inventory, to indicate whether or not this project is aligned with the master plan or a DPW plan
Yeah.
or whatever it might be.
That's a good idea. We'll add that in. Cross-reference it where we find it applicable.
Right.
I would think keeping, the green space, like you said, like a lot of the DPW stuff speaks right to, aesthetically
Yeah.
what we want in our master plan, and it
Right.
might not be like,
The specifics, but
tis
the
for
general,
task,
yeah,
right?
exactly.
But it's
Oh, sure.
definitely,
Yeah.
yeah, plays into our city.
Just to clarify real quick, I know we were talking a lot about roads because it's missing and it's on there, but we're also adding other infrastructure items as well, right? Or considering those items like sewer,
Yes, that's
sewer,
all part
water.
of that information that we just got.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No.
Sewer is something that's actually state mandated. Is that true? I've heard it at city council meetings. Maybe I'm hearing it wrong, but aren't there parts of sewer that the city has to take up to
There will
remove
be-
lead pipes or something like
There
that?
will be things that are needed to be conforming with state and federal laws, for sure.
And that's
Yeah.
something that I know, only because I've heard it at the city council meetings, that they try to plan back to back with the streets and
Right.
how they might, strategically go through that to spend less money.
Mm-hmm.
But that's something, would they be able to speak to that?
Yes.
You
And
expect
that's part
they
of the
will?
process too, yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's one of the things that is a good outcome of having this planned program of capital expenditures, is being able to identify, and that's why the teams have met together, the department heads, so that they've had a chance to understand those different aspects of it. So, for sure. And that may be why if a resident said, well, my street really needs improvement, and someone else, we say, well, we're gonna do that here next year because there's also these other 2 projects that are going on at the same time. That helps people understand that too.
Then they can fight outside.
They can fight outside.
Yeah. Okay.
I know with the, our previous city manager once presented on, capital improvement needs, relative to roads, sewer, water, et cetera. And I think a lot of that was done in concert with our city engineer. One of the things that stuck out to me when I was, watching that presentation, I forget if it was last year or 2 years ago now, but was the high cost of infrastructure projects. Right, and I think, I've heard we want to be mindful and realistic, making sure that projects are feasible. So I know that large projects, can be upwards of $5 million or more at a time, and I don't know whether DPW or our city engineers, when we add this information to our capital improvement plan, if we're breaking that out, phasing it so that we can implement infrastructure improvements.
Where they can, they will phase it. And we'll try to note that in the description of the projects too. And there may be things where we say, we know not in the next 5 years, but in the next 10 years, we're going to have this massive replacement program that we're going to have to take care of. It's a good way to see it in print and to be prepared for it, because there are going to be those things that we just have to do. And to try to understand how we can combine it with other projects, how we can get grant funding for it. Even having it in here then helps us say, well, maybe we can, keep an ear out for projects that are funding sources that might really fit this. So thinking about those things up ahead. But yeah, there are going to be, that's part of the process of seeing it out over a longer period than 1 year at a time, to try to see how we can phase things, or just to really be prepared. Like, we're going to have some big ticket items that we need to figure out how we're going to take care of.
I guess with that said, just to clarify, so projects that we are not currently able to fund within this six-year time period, they'll still be listed as kind of
Yes.
an unmet need,
Yes.
so to speak. Okay,
Right, because that's important for people to understand.
right.
Do we know the budget of like workable dollars for this yet? No? Okay, so we don't, even going in a public hearing, we won't know, like, this is what we got to work with, here's what our needs are.
That's really up to the city council.
Yeah,
Which
and-
is good. That gives you the ability to just keep focusing on the long range and the projects, without having to be as mindful. I mean, obviously, you're going to have an eye to that, but not to be overly burdened by that.
Right, I just meant in terms of transparency with residents, right? And I think this is great. It's just another layer of like transparency and involvement. And really, it's seeing your dollars at work, right?
That's what we think.
It's really great. So, but I'm just, in terms of like policy coming forth on a federal level, there's a lot of talks about infrastructure, right? Is there, and maybe it's just me, but is there any concern about like jumping the gun per se and getting ahead of it and then not having the funding, whereas like maybe next year we've got a bill passed that might help fund a lot of these
I think
infrastructure
that
things?
there's an eye to that already.
There is?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And the engineer's aware of that too, and DPW, and we are as well.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, I expect you guys probably, you guys are
Yeah.
for sure, yeah. Okay.
I'm sorry. How are we going to prioritize the projects on a per year basis if we don't know how much money we're able to, that's I guess available, so to speak, for us to?
It's really more of you're not prioritizing the projects necessarily on the money that's available, you're prioritizing the project on how important it is. So like I said, if it's a state and federal law requirement, we're gonna have to figure out a way to fund it. So that would be our highest priority, and then we work down from there. And so that's part of the ranking process, that we'll do that. Joe and I were just talking about, we have to set up our next meeting so that we have that opportunity to do that before we come back for the public hearing.
Okay, I'm just a little concerned if, we put something at some point we put something in front of city council and they have a number of comments of, why is this on, next year's capital improvement plan? And there's this, big back and forth, and I imagine there's going to be big conversations since this is our first time doing it.
And there may be something that they look at and go, that's not gonna work for next year. That becomes part of, next September, October, when we start doing this again, to say, we know that project's not gonna be funded this year, so let's move it to next year. Or we had it on here, we found an additional funding source, so we can keep that on this year's CIP. But this isn't gonna be, like I said, it's not gonna be set in stone. Like, when you see this, it doesn't mean that in 2024, we're gonna do everything that's listed in here. It's just really for planning purposes to help us get a grip on what needs to be done and generally the resources that it would take to get to those things.
It's kind of a glorified honey to-do list of things. You give a whole list of all of the items, and you know that you're not going to accomplish all of them, but you at least attempt to make it through that process.
But nevertheless, I think that the residents of the city are expecting that all corners of the government are pretty well aware of how much money there is, what comes first, what comes second, what comes third, and I don't get the impression that we're I get the impression we're playing catch-up right now, which is fine. I think that's.
We've got to start somewhere, right?
We got to start somewhere, exactly.
Absolutely.
So, and it sounds like we don't have a lot of time before budgets start forming. And there are multiple contingencies. We may get the millage coming up later this year. We may not. I think our plans need to be multifaceted to include versions that, if we get this millage, this, and if we don't, this, and sorry, Selfridge, but that road,
Yeah.
whatever, right? But I would propose, Mr. Chair, if we could maybe talk about having scheduling another a breakout session with some of the commissioners to really work closely with you to try to do the best we can. I've jotted down a few action items. First of all, you brought up integration. Do we have symmetry between the master plan and the department heads? We could put up a simple just check in the box, like, do we think this item covers all bases, or are we missing some? And then, I have a few must-dos. Like, I went on a little tour of Clawson today to some restaurants, and I talked to some people, and like, if you get nothing else done in 2022, please get the trash out of the parking lot, or something like that, right? It's not $80 million worth of roads to fix that, right? Somehow, some way, I think we can figure this out.
Right, and that's not going to rise to the level of $5,000 improvement that's going to go in the CIP, but to your point, is still worth discussing and resolving at some level.
So when you say that.
Can I respond a little? Just, there's a lot of things that might stand out to citizens, like, I've seen recently on Facebook, like, oh my gosh, my road. It's an everyday occurrence, but they're also as a human, you're guilty of it, right? That you take for granted, that requires a maintenance level of daily, that a lot of this really is addressing a lot of the tedious maintenance type things that you can't, line for line on a master plan. I don't think you can necessarily say, this is this and this is this. It's like, this encompasses this, so I can appreciate for sure where you're going, but I don't know if we can necessarily, line for line go through it and put it on our master plan. Does the city want roads, fixed? Yes. But if they weren't getting their leaves picked up because the truck wasn't working, well, that's not a problem until the truck stops working, So a lot of it can kind of get lost, in those, and maybe that's not the next year thing, right? The truck, or I'm just using that as an example. But there are things that are a maintenance type, and that's, I think, part of what the process of figuring this out and asking questions and having the department head there is for,
Yeah.
right?
Yes, and we can certainly take a look at, I think that was a good addition to our tables, or to add that little column about, what long-range planning document does this seem to hit? And we can add that in for sure. I think that's a good idea. And if you have other things that you want to send us, just let us know, and we can figure out if they don't go in here, where do they go?
Right.
Do we have enough time? You said the end of March, and we still have to add in additional projects or the infrastructure projects.
We'll
I don't know what
coordinate,
criteria.
Yeah, and we don't have a hard and fast
Okay.
deadline date, but the sooner we can get it to the council, the easier it will be for them to prepare their budgets for next year. So we want to make sure we do it in a timely way, because it's been the first time. It takes a little bit longer to get the ball rolling and get the information that we need and make sure everybody understands what we're doing and how we're doing it. So we'll figure out what dates, if we need to move things around, to accommodate everybody understanding where we're going and have a public hearing too.
Okay.
Okay.
What criteria are we using to prioritize these projects?
I think we talked about that, and we had it in our first set of handouts at the meeting, but I'll make sure that we get it. Again, I don't remember them off the top. But do we have that in this? I can't remember if we put it in here. If we didn't, we should.
No, I
It
don't
might be in the
remember seeing
appendix,
that.
which you don't have yet, which probably is where it is. Yeah, I think it's in the appendix, which
Okay.
I didn't print out.
I didn't see it.
But generally, the top priority is, like I said, federal or state law. Something that is going to improve service, save money, replace something that is essential to the provision of service in the city, in accordance with long-range plans. I think those are they kind of fall in that kind of general hierarchy, but I have Well, I'll make sure you get that. Well, that's going to be the subject of our next team meeting, to do that ranking and
Could I
include
be
that in here.
invited to that next team meeting?
sorry?
Could I be invited to
Sure.
that next team meeting?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, I think we need to make a lot of progress in the next few weeks to get as comprehensive a recommendation to council as possible,
Mm-hmm.
because although it may not, we're not printing money by talking or planning, you know,
Right.
we're not making any dollars that way, but at least, you know, I feel like the planning commission would be doing its job to provide as much value add as we can to that recommendation, and that council, I think council is just gonna unfortunately have to make a very calculated vote whether there's money to do something or not, but it's our role, I think, to kind of pinch pennies, not pennies, but priorities, to do what you're saying, to maximize the maintenance dollars that we have, and give citizens the impression that if it isn't done today, it is part of a plan to be done sometime
Exactly.
later, so.
Right. And presenting it in that way of saying, look, we have a lot of things that we need to do, but we are in limited funds. And so when people see that, it's like, oh, yeah. You know, they just kind of, you get it. Like, you really want that road done, but you have to understand that there's a balance.
It seems to me that the items on the inventory are the easy ones, right? We know we're going to need tires for the truck. We know we're going to need cameras for the police car. We know we're going to need these things. These are simple to budget,
It's a pretty
simple to.
straightforward.
Yeah.
Yeah,
program.
with that said, when the departments make these lists, I'm sure they start out with 100 things, right? Or maybe not.
You know, they
maybe
really
not.
didn't.
No, okay.
No, they
but-
really didn't have, you know, a lot. Some of them had a few things that we were like, actually, it's below 5,000, so we don't even have to put it in here. It just goes to the operating budget if you need it this year. If not, go for it next year. But those folks know what they need, and they know what is an appropriate ask, if that makes sense.
Right, but like even if they're asking, they don't necessarily count that maybe it might not come just right now, right?
Oh,
Like,
yeah, that's why you see it. Like, we think we can get one more year out of it. So we can put it in for, 23 or 24, or we can split up the acquisition of, there were a couple things that we were gonna do, some in this year and some in the following year. So there's definitely an eye for, trying to stretch things out as long as they can, as long as they're useful, and updating them when it really is a benefit. So that by adding a new piece of equipment, now it's gonna save us person hours, and money, because now we're not throwing money into this thing that we have to keep fixing every 6 months.
in like really if, well, you said fixing every 6 months, but if I'm just using this off the top of my head, if the leaf sucker upper thing,
Yeah.
I don't know what it's called, if that thing goes, we're not gonna like if that happens mid-year, we have to replace it, right? Like, it's not something that the city is gonna forego leaf pickup.
Or, yeah, and then the residents have to, rake their own leaves, bag them. I mean, that's what.
Bag them, what?
Yeah, so that's trying to anticipate, like, we know that it's working now. We don't anticipate anything tragic happening to it, but we know that it's aging. And based on our experience, we probably will get 2 years left out of it. So just trying to anticipate those needs down the
But if it
road.
went like in 6 months and even instead of a year,
Yeah.
does that mean they don't get it
No,
for a
it would
year?
mean they would
Okay.
go to city council and they would
Yeah.
say, we need a budget amendment so that we can replace this
Gotcha,
piece of
yeah,
equipment that
so
we really
there's
need to be
no-
able to do the service.
Okay,
Yeah.
there's no handcuffs on
No, no,
the,
no.
yeah.
But a flag should be raised if that happens and it wasn't part of our plan.
Sometimes we can't anticipate
Yeah, you
every
can't.
single
I
thing that's
understand.
gonna
Like a
happen.
leaky
I understand.
roof,
I
right?
understand
Like,
that.
right,
And that-
unless
that's
the
a
shingles
good
missing.
statement in general, but more often than not, if it has to do with a road failing in Clausen, it should be anticipated.
And we have no idea
Yeah.
where these water main breaks appear from.
That's
And
true.
we've been getting a lot of them lately.
Although, wasn't there an assessment done? I was
Yes. Mm-hmm.
looking, there was an assessment for that
Yeah.
a few
Staring
years
at
ago.
it, yeah.
Of like the weak spots, right, or something like that in the, yeah.
So I'm just saying, as a personal, metric, as a performance monitoring, are we doing a good job or are we doing a bad job? If it's not even on a list, and suddenly it comes up, I think it's a bad job. If it's on the list and it's like, yep, we knew it was going to fail, it was on our warning list, we failed to address this 5 years in a row, and it failed because of funding, like, that's a perfectly acceptable
Yeah.
possibility. But if it was not even on our list, then I think,
Right,
could have
and
done
barring
better.
some,
Yeah.
catastrophe where something, gets picked up in a tornado, that you
Right.
can't plan for that, then you would not, necessarily have thought of that happening. But I think over time too, so next year when we update this, you'll see in the project descriptions, the things that we did this year. So in 2022, 2023, we did these projects, and so they've been moved off the list, and then we've added these projects here, so that you'll get to see how that changes over time, which I think will be also really helpful.
Clausen's not failing, I just have to say that. Like, we've got good parks, and, I mean, like, yeah, some of our roads have, there's some rough parts, and I'll swerve around, but like, every city is a working progress, it's an ongoing thing. So I do anticipate that we will have parts where, like, we got to readdress this, like, now, right? Where we thought it was 5 years out, but, we kind of need that now. It can change with hiring a new person, right? Like, a police department needs more people. Well, they didn't anticipate another car, but we need another officer, like, so I don't, you must be a tough boss.
You have to ask them.
They're
But-
right here.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I
Thank you.
apologize
Thanks
for all the
good
rookie
questions. Let us know if you have any others, and then we'll,
Jill, one more.
Yes.
I just want to, kind of going back and making sure that this plan is, somewhat realistic. I know this will inform the city council in terms of the budget development and budget approval. Is our finance director going to be taking a look at this in terms of?
she's been
what-
involved in this, yeah.
Well, in terms of providing it, but.
Yeah.
Feasibility of?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, thank you.
So do we have to motion for it to move forward?
No,
or-
it's still, it's just a working document.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
We can, the public hearing can be set. It's not something that we have to necessarily like have a motion to set a public hearing, so.
Well, I would just-
When the document's ready, we'll set a public hearing.
What
Will
I'm
you-
understanding is that the customer of this effort that you're talking about making is the public hearing. But what I think is being discussed here is that it would be reviewed by the planning commission internally before it goes to there, right? So,
I will bring it, I'd like to bring it back to you as a draft before we set the public hearing.
yeah, and I mean, I think we should reasonably expect that there's going to be some iterations about it, and that's kind of where I was going with, could we like schedule some, like, every Thursday or something, some meeting with, and it can be virtual, it can be just an exchange of packets and email back for, it doesn't have to be a physical meeting, but I think like to show progress and to make sure that we're giving opportunity to get every voice heard, and to give you feedback. I think for years you were not even provided this feedback, right? No one provided you that help, so, and we didn't have a city manager for quite some time, so there's a very unique situation in 2022 that we have facing here, so in fairness of that, I'm just suggesting maybe we schedule some frequent cadence of meeting to help make it as good a document as it can be.
Yeah, and we'll,
Sorry.
no, it's fine. So we'll work with city staff on if we can arrange that extra meeting. But I do think that probably one meeting, and this is typical, that we would have, we'd sort of introduce the topic, that we would have one working meeting with the planning commission and then the public hearing, and I think that should be sufficient. And we'll have you, and we'll include you with Commissioner Fitzer on the next team meeting where we talk about the working draft. So I think that'll help. And then I think at our next meeting, we'll see if we can get more of the department heads to attend, and then hopefully get most everybody's questions answered at that point.
Thanks, Joe. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Good, we have a plan.
That's what we do.
Are we expected to vote on pertinence at the public hearing for this? Is that when the planning, like, when we decide, I'll decide, like, what's higher priority, or are we gonna task these as planning commission at the public hearing?
They will be assigned the ranking in the process, and it'll be presented, and then will be
Okay.
just a general overall, we approve this document.
Gotcha, okay.
Yeah, and because you are relying on professional staff that have been working on this document, as well as, your review of it in general. So that is part of that approval.
Okay,
So we don't get blamed.
yes.
It's not binding.
Yeah, I see that.
May help.
Okay, thank you. Agenda item number 8, then, zoning amendment discussion for impervious surface coverage.
Right, thank you. So we talked about this a little bit at the Planning Commission last summer, and then some other issues kind of swamped the conversation, and we left it alone for a while, and now we're coming back to it. Basically, we have a lot coverage standard in the R1 and R2 districts, which are our two single-family districts. And it's 35% of the lot, but it only applies to buildings. We don't have an additional standard that applies to all the impervious surface on a lot. And over the last couple of years, we've had several sort of eyebrow-raising proposals for paving most of a residential lot, or a lot more of a residential lot than you would typically expect to be paved. So staff would really like some tools to deal with that kind of request. And obviously, flooding is a major concern of a lot of residents, because there have been issues with that. And the more pavement you slap down on residential lots, the less water is being absorbed, and the more water is likely to flow to places where it wasn't flowing before. So we want to explore the idea of also having an impervious surface coverage standard. So 35% with buildings remains the standard for buildings, but then you have sort of a second standard that applies to the rest of the lot. It's patios and driveways and all the other stuff that you put on a lot.
So that's to say, presently, Joe, the driveway doesn't count towards the 35%.
Exactly, yep. Yep. So it's got to be really part of the building or the detached garage or whatever else is on the lot. If it's got a roof, it counts as coverage, basically. But if it doesn't, it's not coverage. So really what you're trying to do with any language that you adopt into the zoning ordinance is balance the potential impact of paving large portions of a residential lot on surrounding properties, both from an aesthetic standpoint and from a drainage standpoint, and the impact on the subject property of restricting coverage. So people want things on their lot. They want a patio, they want this, they want that. So we want to give people the freedom to do things on their lot, to a reasonable degree, but we also want to make sure that they're not doing so much that it starts causing problems. So we've studied the issue, and we're looking at recommending some amendments to various sections of the zoning ordinance. We have a couple of things in the definition section here. One would just be adding a definition of impervious surface, because we don't have one in the ordinance right now. So what are we even talking about, right, when we refer to impervious surface in the zoning ordinance? If we define the term, anywhere in the zoning ordinance we refer to impervious surface, we now know exactly what that means. And then we have an addition to the definition of structure. On page 3 of this memo, you can see just above where it said the little blue implications, the full definition that we have in there of structure is there right now. And we just want to add a sentence to the end of that to note that structures don't include pavement on the ground, which is just a clarification of the definition you have now. Then within our single-family dwelling standards, I've included the entire single-family dwelling standards section in this memo, just for your reference. But we would look at adding an item number 12. Just noting, okay, why are we even thinking about this? Excessive impervious surface coverage can harm the aesthetic quality of neighborhoods, increase urban heat island effects, and impair the ability of land to absorb stormwatering, contributing to flooding and erosion. So in order to prevent these effects, impervious surface coverage of a lot shall be limited by sections 3.1A4 and 3.1B4, which in the new clear zoning ordinance is the dimensional standards for the R1 and R2 districts. So we've got then 3 standards. In a front yard or exterior side yard, paving is limited to a permitted stoop, porch, or patio, customary walkways, and a driveway, and it can't be more than 50% of the area of a front yard. Where a driveway traverses a side yard on an interior lot, which is a defined term in our ordinance, one of the 2 side yards on the lot can be fully paved because you could have a driveway taking up that entire side, but we don't want that to be too wide. You know, if you've got a 17-foot wide side yard on that side, we'd rather not see that fully paved. And then you're not paving both of your side yards. So if you've got the driveway on one side, we're not paving the other side yard. You can put landscaping, gravel, whatever you want there, but you're not actually putting concrete on that other side of the house. We had actually a proposal to do that not that long ago. I'm not sure if that ever happened. I don't think it did. I think we talked him out of it. But, oops, I just moved to the other page. So, and then finally, areas of impervious surface shall not direct water onto neighboring properties. And ultimately, that's an engineering consideration. Anytime we have a new house built, engineering does review the plans for it. But if you've got somebody modifying an existing lot, we can have them look at that too and just make sure that the water is all going in the right direction. And then as for district standards in those sections I referenced earlier, 3.1A4 and 3.1B4, we would add below maximum building lot coverage 35%. Right now it says maximum lot coverage, so we'd add building. So maximum building lot coverage is 35%. And then the maximum impervious surface coverage is this little table that we've got here. So we've set it up with tiers so that it changes with the size of the lot. So when you have up to 5,500 square feet, which is the minimum lot size right now in those 2 districts, but we have a lot of lots in town that are smaller than that. So we have a 70% threshold. Basically, you can have the building coverage times 2 on that sort of lot. But when we get to larger lots, that 70% suddenly becomes a lot of pavement, right? So we're lowering the threshold as we go up in size on these lots. You probably get even a little bit more raw square footage of pavement on those larger lots, but the percentage is smaller. So if somebody's got, a full quarter acre or something, and there are a few parts of the city where people do have close to that, we're not looking at paving 70% of a full quarter acre, right? We have a little thing for reference at the end. We kind of sampled randomly around the city some lots and sort of guesstimated, here's about what percentage they have. And we found a couple that were pretty high. We found a few that were very low, particularly on those larger lots. But we came up with these percentages, trying to accommodate what felt like reasonable development in each of these size ranges. So if you have any questions, comments about any of what I just threw at you, happy to answer any of them.
It's good to get this into our ordinances, but is there some problem that's prompted this? Are we noticing that people want to put a lot more concrete down?
You read my mind.
We have, yeah. Joan, I don't know if you want to speak to that.
I mean, I know when we have an empty lot and we get a new building coming in, we have to have this on our ordinances to control that.
We had a homeowner not that long ago that had planting beds in front of the house and along the sides that thought those were too much work and it would be better to just pave over those areas.
Okay.
Was
So,
this backyard or
um,
front yard?
We had nothing that said that.
Front?
Yeah, front yard, in front of the house, along the side of, and in the side lot. Couple areas in front of the home, and then another area in front of the home, and then the whole side lot. So we had nothing that said you can't do that. Basically, we had nothing to say you couldn't pave your entire lot.
So this will
if you
prevent
wanted
this from
to.
happening in the future, but someone in that case, are they considered grandfathered in?
It
or are
wasn't
they-
done.
Are they non-conforming at that
It
point?
wasn't done.
It wasn't done.
No, no,
Had they done it, they'd be non-conforming.
Can they
right.
check the price of cement, maybe? I don't know.
Well, yeah, right.
So will those properties be grandfathered that are exceeding this now? Because even my neighborhood, we have probably a few that violate this right now.
Oh,
They're
sure.
existing structures.
Yeah, if they're currently over one of these thresholds, they would be considered non-conforming. And, if they make modifications in the future, they'd be expected to become compliant. But if they leave things alone, they'll just
Could
be
we-
able to be non-conforming in perpetuity.
Could we force someone that bought a house that's not conforming to remove concrete?
Not with its simple change of ownership, no.
It's not like a site plan. It's-
Yeah, it's not exactly, it's not a site plan, yeah.
I
Yeah,
have a
if they
question.
rebuilt something, then you would expect them to reduce, yeah.
In terms of, when you said okay, so we don't typically have driveways down the center, right? So you said one
Right.
side of the driveway. I always thought one side of the driveway was my neighbor's, right? Like in between the house and the driveway,
Mm-hmm.
that's their property, my neighbor's property, right? Or do I just neglect that lawn and let them cut it? I don't know. But like, and then-
Yeah, so your neighbor's got a driveway and there's a little bit of grass
Little
between
grassy
your
area.
house and their
Yeah,
driveway.
yeah, because you said you can't do both
Yeah,
sides, right?
Typically,
So-
that's your property, yeah.
It is?
Yep.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
I never mow it. But then, if you say, but if you say you can't do both sides, if that side's mine, then the other side's my neighbor's, right?
Right, yeah.
So, but I'm wondering if we're kind of, not to get too tedious here, but like, let's say my neighbor does it, well, by default, does that mean I can't do it because it's on one side of my driveway and I can't have both sides? So can you see how that might exclude, so like every other house can do it then, or?
Well, there should be 5 feet between your house, well, that's the current setback. Some of the older lots in town do have less than 5 feet, but there should be a certain amount of setback between your neighbors, where your neighbor can pave up to, and your house. If the driveways are both on the same side,
Right. Well, yeah.
and they're next to each other, then you'd expect there to be some non-paved area on the other sides of those houses.
But like, a lot of just driving through the neighborhood here, it's like driveway, house, that's the house, and then driveway, house, driveway,
Yep.
house. So if one person says, okay, well, I'm legally allowed to just do one side of my driveway, and this is my side of the driveway, but that means that my neighbor can't do their side. Do you see what I'm saying?
Well, it shouldn't
How
affect, because you've got a property line, and
Yep.
on one side of the property line, you're going to have a driveway coming right up to it, and then you're going to have a certain amount of space to the next house, and that space is where you can't do the paving, basically, if you've got a driveway on the other side of your house. So you got a
Okay.
driveway over here, house, a little bit of space that's not going to be paved, then your neighbor's driveway.
So if it's, let's say one resident has only one pavable area on their driveway, on either side, either their house or their driveway, and they only have one pavable area, and you said you can only do one, you can't do both. Does that exclude them from being able to pave that part, is my question.
I'm trying to visualize.
Because.
We need a whiteboard.
Yeah, right. Okay, so I'm thinking just on my street alone, right? Like there's, on one side of my house is a driveway and then, the neighbor has that little patch of grass there. On the other side of my driveway, I consider mine, right?
But it's probably your neighbor's.
But it's probably, I've been mowing the lawn all wrong for 11 years. But if I only have one side I could potentially cement. Lay
and it's
down
the driveway
pervious
side,
surface.
yeah.
It said like you can only do one side. So that, that doesn't mean if my neighbor does one side on that side of my house, I couldn't do it on the other side of my house, right? Like, let's say
Yeah.
there's driveway to driveway on all houses down the street, from house to house.
Yeah, I mean,
It's one or the other, but not both sides.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But if two neighbors did it, then it'd be both sides. Do you see what I mean? If me and my neighbor both wanted to pave our driveway and extend it out a little bit, it would take both sides of the house. Does that make sense to you?
Well, your neighbor can't pave onto your property, though. So there's always that setback of your house from your neighbor's property line is going to prevent that, because your neighbor can't expand their driveway onto your property.
Okay. I just want to make sure we're not
We
allowing.
had two lots side by side, and they both had driveways on the same side, so it was effectively
One wide driveway, yeah. That's okay, you just don't pave on the other side of your house,
Gotcha.
basically.
I think I understand, but I don't know. Maybe I should take a picture. I'll bring it in.
Yes, feel free.
Joe, the spirit of the uprising of this seems to be one of an aesthetic one. It seems like someone was about to do something really unattractive with their front yard, and it struck a nerve with Joan, thankfully, because it would have probably been an eyesore.
Sure.
But the other component to it that rings for me is, we have older homes and we live in rainy weather, and if we don't have good drainage and if we don't manage the water that's accumulating next to the house, very likely it can infiltrate the foundation. So just from the benefit of the homeowner, the more we can do to encourage them through codes and through ordinances to do things with drainage and whatnot, the less likely they're going to have an event in their basement, maybe.
Yeah.
So is there the possibility to include in language like this some proactive measure if you're going to do it in this way, if you're going to have a driveway right up abutting to your house, that you would use some drain tile to move water if you get into 50% or 60% of your property being this way, or even just language that says, entirely for your benefit, to avoid your basement from flooding, please don't surround your house with concrete beveled towards your foundation. It may prevent you from having a huge problem, expensive later.
Yeah, typically, the building standards and our engineering review of new homes catches that. If somebody does something kind of on their own, they might have an issue, but our review typically catches the pitch of a driveway toward the house or away from the house. And I can talk to the engineer and the building inspector just to see what they've got on the books about that, because it may already be covered.
Yeah.
But if not, we can always look at something.
Some of that, I believe, is if you have a driveway, I've had my driveway done, 10 years ago or so.
Sure.
But you hire a contractor to do that, and the contractor has to pull a permit because it's such a
Yeah.
big project, it's going to be obvious it has to be done.
Yep.
And Mr. Elvis was our building inspector at the time. He came out and he checked pitch incline on it, where the water's going to run this way. The thickness of the approach has to be different than the thickness of the driveway. So that's all taken care of by the building department.
Yeah. Yeah, they're not going to let you sluice all the water into your foundation. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, part of the goal of this is just to see fewer hoses after a big rainstorm, because we've all driven down I live in Berkeley, so I'm not that far from here, and we've all driven down a street after a rainstorm and just seen all the little hoses coming down the driveway, getting the water out of the basements, and yeah, ultimately we want to see fewer of them. And a lot of the way that you're going to get there is through engineering improvements, but we can do things in our ordinance like limiting the amount of paving that will help, they'll contribute.
Have we had issues with water? Or was this proposal come up just on purely aesthetics?
I think the original impetus of this was more aesthetic than it was to do with flooding. But once we started talking about it internally with our engineer and the DPW director, it became clear pretty quickly that we should be doing something about this for other reasons too, that flooding is a major issue and that putting some limitations on impervious surface coverage would help.
Okay, but we haven't had issues up until now. You were trying to do a minority report right now, are we?
Well, we have had flooding issues though.
So we,
We don't know if it's a direct cause. is what
Yeah,
you're saying, right?
exactly. Yeah, it's there's probably not like an A-B causation there that you could point to, but nevertheless, we do know that the more infiltration you have, generally speaking, the less severe your flooding is.
I know so your maximum surface coverage percentages, you compared it to some, a sample size of the lots you kind of reviewed. Are these percentages, or is there any validation to, like, in terms of retention, like rainfall retention? Or is this just based off of existing conditions of all the lots that we have today?
It's existing conditions, yeah.
Is there, I tried to look this up in Municode to see, just to get a framework of I didn't see a lot. I didn't see a lot in other cities that are doing it in an impervious surface.
There aren't many. Birmingham's one of the few that has a good standard around
They
here.
do?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, they build lot to lot all
Believe
day.
it or not, yeah.
What's theirs, 5%? I don't know.
It varies. It's got lot
yeah.
coverage and I think impervious surface coverage.
Yeah.
Okay.
They
Surprising how most of the newer homes do comply with their ordinance.
yeah.
They must have a very low threshold then or something.
It would surprise you. I know it's
Yeah.
30% lot coverage.
30?
Yeah.
For impervious surfaces must be 30?
Surface is higher. It's
Okay.
probably
It's 70, I think, in most of their districts, 65 or 70.
Study for another community that was considering impervious surface coverage too.
Yeah, New Baltimore, right? I know. Oh, Sylvan Lake. Okay, yeah. Well, we did a very similar ordinance for New Baltimore
Okay.
too.
I mean, have you been, I could see certain people saying, this is my property, right? Like if I want to put a patio covering my whole backyard, or if I want to, I get rocks are technically, they don't fall under this ordinance, right? So if someone wants
yeah.
to pull all their grass and lay all rocks, they can do that, but they can't lay
Sure.
cement. So I could see there might be some individuals that might say, I don't know, I'm sure that you wouldn't have this in front of us if we weren't allowed to do
Sure.
it, right? But are there opportunities for people to seek variances in this?
Sure. There's always an opportunity to seek a variance. It's part of your due process. And, basically the process would be you'd come to the building department saying, I want to cover 90% of my lot. And the building department would say, no, you're not, because that's not permitted by our ordinance. And then you would take it to the Zoning Board of Appeals. And if you had some case for it, the Zoning Board of Appeals might grant you all or some of that variance. But you'd have to make a pretty good case for it.
Well, I'm wondering if this gives the ZBA the opportunity to implement, like Nate was saying earlier, to offset stormwater runoff if they have, let's say, rain barrels and things like that.
Right.
Or catch basins, or whatever they might want to implement. If there's, and I know we talked about this prior, if they have a certain proximity to going over, if they have the ability to put in 2 rain barrels, or I don't know.
As a condition of a variance, you could require a certain degree of drainage that would ensure that you weren't creating a problem.
And
Yes,
this doesn't
absolutely.
exclude them from being able to do that, right?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Probably someone who was thinking of paving their entire yard wouldn't be that same person who's using rain barrels.
But it could be an opportunity for you to meet in the
Yeah.
middle somewhere, right?
They would be the kind of person who would not want to pave their entire yard.
Yeah.
They're aware of impervious surfaces and drainage because they're using rain barrels and other.
but the zoning
Well,
board
true,
of
but-
appeals, in order to offset the effect of,
It's
of
simply
a
an
variance
opportunity
for
to meet in
lot
the middle,
coverage,
maybe. Yeah.
would be able to place a
Trade-off.
condition on the approval of the variance that said you have to do certain things to accomplish the drainage that you're.
They're not
yeah,
watering gardens,
exactly.
obviously, right?
Right, yeah,
With that
right.
water, but yeah, at least they're stopping it, I guess.
Right.
And discharging, I don't know, that's a whole nother thing, right?
And then part of the reason that we did this little sample of lots too is that we wanted to make sure that, oh, okay, if we set 70% as a threshold that you can't go past, are we suddenly creating 400 non-conforming lots? You know, because everybody's at 85%. But it turns out when we look at it, when we survey lots that are in that size range, people really aren't over 65%, generally speaking. They're in that range. So 70% is rather generous, I would say, for that lot size. You know, one of the lots that we looked at that was in that middle range was a little bit of an outlier up at 70%. But most of them were much more like in the 40% range. So, you know, what we found basically just by looking around was that we didn't think we were going to be creating too many non-conforming lots.
Okay, this amendment deals with impervious surfaces. I don't see anything in here. Have we looked at permeable concrete? I know Mary Liz was going to put a parking lot behind her place with permeable stones.
Right.
So it looks like a concrete lot, but the water goes through it until she found out that the ground doesn't perk well enough for that to work.
So it's somewhat covered by the impervious surface definition. Pervious and impermeable pavement approved by the city engineer shall not be considered an impervious surface. So if you did have some sort of paving system, like a grass paver kind of thing, that where water can infiltrate, the engineer could say, yes, that actually does count as pervious, so it's not going to count against your lot coverage. And you know, I understand that goes a little bit back to the aesthetic thing where they can cover more of their lot. But, you know, given that we've got multiple purposes, you know, working together here, we thought that was a reasonable exception to put in the definition so that someone who really was trying to foster good drainage on their lot, even as they were covering more of it, could get an exception if they used the right material. Because you know the engineer is going to look at it and not take it at face value that yes, this is permeable. They're going to look at how much water actually goes through it versus how much runs off of it. Right. And there are formulas to look at for how well water actually infiltrates through those materials. It's kind of crazy. I mean, you can do like a basketball court that water can go straight through now. The materials have really kind of come a long way, but you've got to have the right stuff underneath it too, because if the pavement is permeable, but then it just runs into 4 inches of crushed limestone and doesn't go anywhere, that's its own problem, right?
Flood, yeah.
You know? So you've got to have the right, you know, permeability below your surface material as well.
Doesn't our football field have something like that underneath the
Yeah, I think so.
track? Yeah, because you got to take in freezing and stuff, right?
Yeah,
You have to
exactly,
take that into
yep.
consideration, yeah.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, if I could just add a comment. I think it's great. I think that this particular issue is kind of small in the grand scheme of Clausen's needs, but it's obviously it was brought up, so might as well close the issue while it's fresh, so
Yep.
it's good. The meat on this particular plate for me is very few people are going to concrete over their entire front yard.
Right.
But everyone in Clausen, I think, at some point in the future is going to do what Greg did and what I'm about to do, and it's redo the driveway.
Sure.
And I would just like to ask if you can review this for any opportunity to make sure that our ordinances and our codes are really driving the best behavior, the best technology, the best things we can be doing right now when it comes to redoing those impermeable surfaces so that we minimize the chance of flooding to the house. So you're right, it's already the angles and so forth, this is literally bedrock knowledge and how it's done. But for me, I was actually going to run drain tile under the concrete to
Sure.
create downspouts to get to the bottom of the driveway so that I was trying to evacuate water. I think that was just a couple $100 extra I was going to pay to do it, but had I not brought it up, it wouldn't have been done.
Sure, yeah.
So
Yep.
as you're going through it and we talk about impermeables, like it would be a neat tool for residents to go to and say, hey, I have to put a new driveway in. Maybe we should do what Joe says and calculate our impermeables and, oh, look, we have a lot of concrete relative to our lot size. We should talk about drain tile to get some of the water in a lower elevation. It would be great, but other than that, I think it's a good piece.
Sure. Given that some of that's probably going to be done through engineering standards, it probably won't ultimately find its way into the zoning ordinance.
Sure.
But yeah, I think
But that's a
building
good
and
point.
building and engineering standards.
There's
yeah.
so many downspouts that come right out into the driveway too. It's not even just about water, it's convenience too. That
Right.
You don't have a downspout in your driveway, right?
Yeah, well, when my house was built, they put a downspout right next to the driveway, and then every winter I fight ice because it's just like dumping when the snow starts to melt, and then overnight it all freezes into a glare sheet
Yeah.
of,
Mine's frozen right now.
you know.
Yeah, so it would be nice to run that right down to a drain. I wish they
Yeah.
would have done that with my driveway, yeah.
So
Yeah.
you're saying it's not under Code of Ordinances so much as it is some engineering standard,
Right.
and when you pull a permit, they have to comply with this? And this is of the purview of AEW or something, or the?
Building department.
Yeah, the building department and ultimately, yeah, the engineer too, yeah. Yep, so, I mean, that's not in their standards, of course, because, as you know, because you had to ask about it. But we could certainly talk to them about either adding a suggestion or, possibly some sort of requirement.
I just imagine, a Clausen 100 years from now where every house has buried, drain tile to prevent the ice rink that you're talking about. That whole community is going to be worth more money and have happier residents than the community that says, not our problem, keep dumping the water onto the driveway and slipping and falling and suing each other. So I don't know how to make it so, but
I
you
think
do,
most residents
so-
would opt for a couple $100 if that's really all it was,
Yeah.
I think it's great as a suggestion. I don't know about mandatory, but
Clearly, right.
Yeah.
I mean, but this is where codes are used, right? To
Yeah.
try to take the best practices that we have and try to multiply them to it. So it may not be here, but somewhere.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I haven't heard any changes to the text here. So I mean, if we're comfortable with the language that we've got, the next step would be a public hearing, so that we could then add it to the ordinance. So if we want to set that now, that's fine. If we want to talk about it more later, that's fine too. But that's the next step at this point.
Yeah, so one quick question to that. If it happens that they follow that, is there any chance that someone's going to cleverly put like a driveway in front of their house? Like,
I mean, someone will try.
but this would prevent it, right?
For the most part, it will. I mean, we've got the 50% standard in the front yard. And for the most part, this will help a lot. Because if you want, to do a lot in your backyard, you're going to have to think about how much you're doing in your front yard, right? But yes, for the most part, it will probably help with that.
Where's this leads now? Do you need a motion to move this on further to public? Or?
If the planning commission wants to set a public hearing on it, yes, we would need a motion on that. Yeah.
do we need a specific date on that, on the public hearing? Do we have to set up a specific date on the public
I'm
hearing?
sure they can find one for us.
March 22nd would be the first available date.
I'll make a motion to move the impervious pavement for public hearing on March 22nd, you said?
Yep.
Okay. As presented?
Have a motion, anybody support that? Or
Support.
support. Roll call, please.
Mr. Tinlin,
Yes.
Mr. Fitzer,
Yes.
Mr. Cusero,
Yes.
Mr. Hara,
Yes.
Mr. Nushai,
Yes.
Ms. Redmond.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Other business. What do we have under other business? Anything?
Just a few things, Mr. Chair, from my side. We want to thank you. What? Is it not my?
No, go right ahead. If you-
Thank you again, Joe, for presenting that, and Jill for talking about the CIP. At the last meeting, you were kind enough to present our end-of-year report to the city council, so thank you for doing that. We got some good feedback from other city council members. I think they really liked that, and I think it was only used, at the beginning of its potential, So I think it for people who don't attend every planning commission meeting or don't sit on the DDA or, don't see it, this is a great time to present some of the good things that are happening in Clawson, the successes, as well as to give the council and anybody watching that meeting the sense that, yeah, it's a living, breathing thing, this government, and it's really driving and attacking any issue that they can to try to make the city a better place. So thank you for attending that. I think we should do it more frequently. I think we should have, instead of an annual report, I think we should be doing it, maybe at least once every couple of meetings to say, hey, we've accomplished this and we've got 5 more businesses in Clawson than we did the last time we meeting, or, sorry, this isn't our typical feel-good meeting, but we lost 10 businesses and it's not going well. We need to really be aware of this thing and we need to make some changes or something like that. But in general, I think we would expect good news coming out of it. So if I could just propose that we try to have that document living and maybe even quarterly so that we can share the good things that are happening in Clawson and also make it as much a metric-based document as we can. So this is how many new businesses we got, this is how many we lost, this is how our infrastructures are growing to accommodate business growth and resident growth in the future. I think that would be awesome, and if the planning office could help us do that, it would be great. I would also, on a separate topic, like to announce I'm trying to get support from other commissioners to start a breakout session or a subcommittee to look at optimizing our master plan or updating it. It's supposed to be reviewed every so many years, I think, and it's an ongoing activity with the planning office, so working with you guys, of course, but it frustrated me that the master plan does not in any great detail talk about how we're going to plan for a thriving future with more people or more businesses, but we're not talking about how did the sewers need to be improved to accommodate that, or how did the roads need to be improved to accommodate that, and is that part of our plan? And I think that would be great to do. So I realize it's a huge thing to tackle, but I was looking at creating a group of a few other commissioners to see how we can start integrating those concepts of our infrastructure into the master plan. So
Does that, I would think we need clearance on that with Freedom of, is that a Freedom of Information Act kind of thing that?
There will be issues with OMA.
Sorry?
There will be issues with the OMA, Open Meetings Act.
Yeah.
We have to do everything in public.
Well, of course, yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
You're
so,
proposing to do an ad hoc
Unless you're under
committee?
5.
What's that?
unless you're under
Unless you're under 5.
Unless you're under 5, sure.
Yeah.
5 members?
5 members could meet.
Oh, I thought it was once you get 3 together, it
No,
was.
five
no?
members.
Depends on the
Could meet.
quorum,
of
right?
9.
Yeah.
Your membership is 9, so a quorum is 5.
Yep.
And so if 4 of you or fewer meet, then you are able to do that.
Yeah.
If you're just studying things, that's appropriate. You could do study sessions. Sometimes we've done those prior to a regular planning commission meeting. That would be an open meeting. So some of the things that we might look to are, what's changed locally in the last 5 years? What's changed regionally in the last 5 years? Certainly, we know the pandemic has influenced a lot of things. A lot of assumptions that perhaps were placed in 2017, some things we may not even be able to really fully anticipate. What changes are happening in our adjacent communities? How well do the goals and objectives that we had in 2017, and we didn't prepare that plan, but at the time, how well do those relate to today? Is there anything in there that we think is different that needs to be updated? How about the things that the plan indicated that the city was going to implement over time? Have we
Right.
accomplished those things? Looking at all of those things, that's part of your review, and that's part of your obligation as a planning commission, is to do that. At that point, after you do the review, you might say, you know what, this looks pretty good, we're okay. Or you may say, you know what, there's a couple of things that we really want to focus on. Or you might say, you know what, this whole thing needs to be replaced. But whatever that is the planning commission that you do will help you articulate that to council. And then if whatever needs to be done, then asking for the resources to accomplish that.
At the end of the road, obviously, it's an approval by council, right? Any amendment to
They
it.
will direct, yeah.
Yeah, so.
What is your goal? What are you trying to accomplish with your study group that you're trying to?
Right, so, at the end of the day, I want the master plan to be a functional integration of everything we do on planning, I want.
You don't think it is?
It doesn't include enough about the roads and the sewers. I think if we're going to have a thriving Clausen in the future, we need to have the roads and the sewers and the water system to do it. It's the opinion of a lot of neighbors that I talk to, is like, it's okay if it doesn't happen tomorrow. We don't expect it to happen tomorrow, but someday, I don't know if it's 2030 or 2040, but someday, that water mains, should be part of some plan to replace. And
Okay.
if it has nothing to do with funding it, it could be entirely the case it's not funded. But, I think would like to have an answer for any resident that says, what will happen if we have, this huge school over here with X number of new students attending it, but we don't have the sewer for it? Or what will happen if,
How did this issue come up? How do you know that the sewers are not there or won't be there, or how did this come up?
what specifically?
You were talking about the sewers.
And there's some other information that's not part of, I think, the community master plan that was adopted in, it was 2017, but adopted in 2018. But I think that the asset management plan that was prepared by the city engineer may answer some of those questions.
Yeah.
That is probably included, at least by reference in there, or it might have been done after that master plan was finished. So
Close
that
to
might be
around the same
helpful
time,
information.
yeah.
Have you seen that?
Yeah, if you're talking about
Okay.
the CIP plan that they made that just talks about all the roads and the sewers and this.
I think there's a document that goes with that, though, the asset management plan, that really outlines all of the, it's an inventory
Okay.
of all of the infrastructure in the city.
Yeah, they've made presentations to us in the past showing roads and conditions of roads in different areas, and the same as the sewer system. The sewer has been cambered over the years. That's
Yeah,
someplace.
and if we want to
outs-
talk after or aside, maybe we can answer some of those questions up front or, later. And then if there's anything else that needs to be brought back to the planning commission, then that
Yeah, I
might be
mean,
easier for everybody.
In
to
general,
answer.
my ask is I'd like to start the process for the review, and I'd like to optimize it as much as we can, and to have it be as functional a document to help guide the activities that are going to come to planning commission meetings in the future, like CIP meetings and so forth, that it's an integral part of it. Not this thing that sits on a shelf for 5 years until we need to tell the government that we.
But that's not how it works. It doesn't sit on a shelf for 5 years. We have reviews and amendments and so on and so forth. So this city's life did not start with us convening this year here, right? You agree to that, right? That we have had processes in place for good practices.
80% of the roads on this, according to this sheet, 80% of the roads in Clausen either need to be replaced or at the very least resurfaced.
I agree.
And are badly in need of doing it, but it's
I
not
agree.
part of the master plan. So I'm just looking at the absence of it in the master
But
plan.
it is, though. She just told you that it is. It's reference in there.
That level of detail of, this many miles of roads, this level of improvement needs to happen, that is part of, I believe, the asset management plan that the civil engineers put together. That would be referenced in the master plan. That should speak to it as a general level, but the master plan isn't necessarily going to talk about that
Okay.
with great specificity, but we can talk about that offline. And if it's something that needs to be brought back up at the full planning commission, then we can do that as well.
Sure,
Okay,
sure.
let's do that.
Sounds great. So what do I need to gather 2 other people, so it's not just me in an empty room and not having,
You have a forum right here. Why don't you use us? Why don't you use the open meetings that we have? What are you trying to accomplish? Because you didn't answer my questions in the beginning. What are you trying to accomplish?
I'm trying to make the master plan as good as it can be.
Well, I think it's great.
Okay.
Why do you think it's not?
I just said so, but
She just told you that it is referenced there. So you're trying to, I don't understand.
well, I've read it. I've actually read it cover to cover, and I saw no mention of roads. So if it's an amendment that could be included to it, let's look at it. But
That's,
are
okay.
you suggesting that I shouldn't ever do this?
No, I'm suggesting you should do it in an open meeting, like we are right now.
Well, I am. That's exactly what I'm doing.
He's looking for volunteers.
To do it
I'm looking for a breakout committee to
Right, to
review it
accomplish.
in greater detail.
To accomplish what? To add roads and sewers to the master plan? Is that what you're trying to accomplish?
And anything else any other commissioner sees fit?
Okay. So this forum is not okay. We should meet outside then.
It is absolutely okay. I'm looking for a working level conversation.
Okay.
It can be an open meeting, even if there's just two of us. We don't have to have it on an agenda, but I'm happy to do it. It's,
No, because that's why we have other businesses in our agenda, to discuss other business, that any commissioner such as yourself has any ideas that we need to talk about and rectify and maybe adopt.
yeah.
That's
I
what
think
it
it's
is for.
premature to bring it to that stage. This is what my purpose of greeting it in a smaller session.
Okay, but we can still talk about it.
Of course, yeah. It will not be done in a vacuum.
Sure. Okay.
All right, well, so I'm still asking, do I need a motion to gather a subcommittee of less than quorum to meet with you, Jill, and to go through that? Okay,
Yeah, I don't think that has to be motion or anything else, and if you get something worked out, you can always have them add it to the agenda, and if,
yeah. I think the output of the discussion, we'll review the master plan, we'll have a conversation, we'll say, these are the good things about it, these are the things that are missing, or these are the things that, planning department would appreciate some different opinion or some other eyes on it, and if there's open points to it, we'll bring those back to council, or bring those back to the planning commission.
it can't hurt to bring it up, the conversation of it, you know.
Absolutely. Conversation, yeah.
And it might be helpful for, maybe Jill can provide like an outline of what's included in a master plan, if it's more of a surface zoning or more of a detailed, like what specific areas maybe? Is that possible? Okay,
That would be nice.
as a reference. Okay, cool.
Thank you.
Anything else for other business?
I have a question about the training. I know, Joan, we were kind of talking a little bit back. Is there a list of specific training, or because we get emails from the Michigan Planner thing, and there was a couple on there that I was thinking, but I think that you said it needs to be in the Michigan
Well, no,
MSU, or
Sure. No, I said that you were inquiring about Citizen Planner, and it wasn't available at the time through Michigan Planning Association, but it then became available through MSU Extension. So I was just letting you know it was available through that. So as I said in my email, we have a very limited budget, so you would have to, anyone can put in for training, but you have to put in ahead of time and ask if we have the funding for it. And it has to be directly related to your function on whatever board you're on. So putting in for essentials of zoning, I would say would be more not your purview, but targeted towards a ZBA member. Because we have a $1,000 budget for training and seminars that is for every member here and every member on the ZBA and staff. So we would be very careful to be sure. And it's
Sure.
going to be first come, first serve, but we're going to be very careful that it's targeted to your need.
okay, so just run it by you prior to scheduling it.
Right, yeah, I
Okay.
think that's what I wrote. Other than that, I don't think we have anything else new on, going on. Are there any questions about other businesses in the city? I do have one thing. We had someone that got up at a council meeting that said that people are very angry because they don't have answers, because we're not giving them answers about Burger King or Clausen Grill. And I guess I'm going to look for help from all of you, if you see those questions on social media, that those are privately owned properties, and we do not have the right to go in
Tell them
and
what to do.
demo them or force somebody to open business in that spot. That when there is blight in those areas, something that code enforcement can address, we do. Other than that, a building can remain vacant. So that is entirely up to the owner to find someone to lease it or purchase it if they choose to sell it at a price that someone wants to buy. So that's an area, if you see those questions, feel free. You may answer those on social media if you see them, that those are not city-owned properties. and that we do address blight when it occurs, so.
So on that topic, thank you very much for that, because I had a similar feedback given to me also about it, and I was like, I don't know what you want me to do about this. This is
You can't.
totally not my,
Right.
Not my
If a,
police,
if a property owner chooses to sell something at $1.2 million, they may. And it may sit for a very long time at that price because no one's willing to buy it. That's not something we change.
but at the same time, if I park my truck on the street tonight and by 3 o'clock in the morning, if
City ordinance.
memories, it will be ticketed. There will be a fine
And that,
instantly.
exactly. And
No
if
question in my
someone,
mind it'll happen.
if we have rodents in an empty building, or if there are weeds growing or something else that code enforcement can address on an empty property, we do that.
So I think that might be an opportunity to provide some visibility either on the website or something that says, these are on a watch list for blight or for code of ordinance.
No, I'm not going to target a business and say, you're on a watch list for us. But if blight occurs, code enforcement does go address
Let me
it.
finish real quick. I'm not asking you to target anybody. But the people that are complaining, I think, have the idea that no one cares about the status of that property. And in fact, there are requirements for them to maintain the property to a certain level, and if they don't, and, they'll get a code complaint, right? And I think at some point, I don't know the exact process, but at some point, it becomes a fine, right?
Absolutely.
So with regards to, I'm not even going to use the name, but property X, we'll call it, it could be the case that they've been fined every month reliably by the city, and if I'm the one complaining about it, I suddenly feel, if I know that, I suddenly feel, well, the city's doing their part to try to mitigate it to the extent that they can. And at some point, it might become enough of an issue or enough of violation or enough of noncompliance or a lack of response that the city, starts, doing other things to take care of the problem directly, having failed to induce the owner of the property to do it themselves. The only reason I'm bringing it up, I think the opportunity might be to make that process more transparent to the people that are complaining about it and say, look, 12 straight months of fines.
You cannot force a property owner into a corner. You can't do that. He owns the property.
Clearly.
As long as the property's maintained, if the lawn is taken care of. If he doesn't do the lawn, the city does the lawn, we put it on his taxes.
Right.
He's charged for it.
Exactly.
So the city's responsible for the outside appearance of the building, but we can't force him into selling it.
No, and absolutely not, no. I think the expectation is just that the properties are maintained better. And if violations are being, sent to them, and is that a matter of private? Can you post on the website where fines are issued or where complaints are made?
No, we're
I
not
don't-
going to do that.
I don't think I'd do that.
I don't feel someone can come in and ask, but I'm not willing to put that out on a social media site or something. That's like shaming a business because we have cited you this many times. That's, I don't feel that's our place.
Maybe that, yeah.
Yeah, that's bad
I'm not sure that's what
policy.
I'm going at. I'm not conveying it quite right. Okay, so your ask to the council or to the commissioners here is to tell anybody who asks, or you use our means of communication on social media to tell them it's not the city's responsibility to take care of the grass on these properties.
Oh, no, I'm saying that when there is a code enforcement violation, we take care of it. If
Okay.
it's not a code enforcement violation, we don't have a
The
leg to
questioning-
stand on.
The question on councils, if you remember correctly, was what's going to happen with this building? It cannot be vacant. Council and city staff cannot address that because it's a privately owned business.
It can be vacant, it can stay vacant.
They can stay vacant for the
And
end of time.
most of the residents, I think, are fine with it being vacant as long as the owner of that
The
property
question was
maintains it.
not that, though,
Yeah.
on council, was why is it vacant? Can it be X business there?
Okay, I interpreted it different. I thought it looked,
It's nothing to interpret.
I thought
It's-
it
The
looked
question was
like
very
plot.
clear.
But again, if someone asks if there is a code violation, we can address it.
okay.
And we do, all the time.
Along those lines, have you happened to see, I don't know if you or Barb has seen it, Fabricare down the street? Have you seen their awning?
They have a permit in for a new awning.
I don't know, does snow do that to that, or?
Huh?
Does snow do that or something? all
It's been failing for a while.
It's all
And
shredded up.
they inquired several months ago about what they could do and how much signage could they put on an awning, and they have just put in a permit to have it done. So one of those things, it just took a while for them to,
That I would
Get
imagine
it
can be
done.
dealt with administratively. They don't have to come in front of us.
no,
for
it's
anything.
just a sign permit.
City problem, okay.
Yep.
I actually talked to Mr. Lee, he's my dry cleaner there, and he gave me the full rundown. Apparently, he's been waiting for the replacement awning for over a year.
Yeah, it hasn't been that long since they inquired about the signage, but, supply and demand, it's been taking a while for just about everything lately, so. But they are gonna be putting up a new awning.
So one question I might be asked, so if, how often are code enforcement, how often are these reviewed?
Constantly. We receive inquiries or complaints all the time, and code enforcement officers are out patrolling the city all the time.
So how often can
Mr. Chair, we're moving out of the purview of this body. Point of order, please. We're talking about code enforcement. We can't, I don't think. We can.
Are you sure?
Yes, because we're planning commission. We're not.
Well, I understand.
Code
It's just,
enforcement.
we were in her business and she asked us
She's
for.
the DDA director. She's not building department.
She does work on the building department, don't you?
Yes.
Yeah, and it's other business. I think you can ask a question to clarify.
no,
if
we
it
moved
was
to
a-
training.
I don't see it as
We moved
being
to
any type of a conflict. I mean, we're just having an open discussion.
No, we talked about training. She came up, was asked for training opportunities.
That is true. We are still another business, yeah.
Okay, are you still on staff report and
willing-
training opportunities?
Yes, and I think that was it. I don't think there was any other, you got the monthly report. I don't think there was
Yeah.
anything to add from that, so.
Oh, thank you.
Certainly, here after the meeting if you have questions.
Appreciate
There.
it.
Bill, you should have brought that up under other business,
That we are in other business.
No,
though.
we're way past that.
I brought up the training in other
You
business.
jumped onto training before I got up to other business.
My other business was training, though.
Okay.
Now we're up to legal update. And I don't see Rennes here, so I don't think we have any legal update.
Have one.
Does anyone else have any comments to make before I ask for an adjournment? Anywhere else we want to go with this? If everybody's happy, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Well, just one comment. We missed the last meeting. It was canceled. I think there was just a light agenda. So that happened kind of organically. I was surprised by that. I think there's a lot of good work going on there, and I appreciate Joe trying to save our time. So, thank you very much for proposing that. At the same time, if we could have that proposal maybe a few days earlier, just to make sure there isn't any other business that the commissioners may feel is prudent to use for that time. There's a lot to do, as we discussed earlier, so thank you.
With that,
Motion to adjourn, sir.
I have a motion. Do I have support?
Support.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Nushai?
Yes.
Ms. Redmond?
Yeah.
Mr. Quinlan?
Yes.
Mr. Fitzer?
Yes.
Mr. Kucera?
Yes.
Mr. Hara?
Yes.
Thank you, everyone.